The sound of gunfire and screams filled the air as Vladimir Lenin, standing atop an armored car, rallied the crowd of protesters in Petrograd's Palace Square. It was October 25, 1917, and the city was on the brink of chaos. The provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky, had lost control, and the Bolsheviks were seizing power. Lenin's voice, deep and commanding, cut through the din, urging the crowd to rise up against the government and take control of their destiny. "The time for words is over," he declared. "The time for action has begun." The crowd, fueled by passion and desperation, surged forward, overwhelming the government's forces and marking the beginning of the end of the Romanov dynasty. As the Bolsheviks claimed victory, the city descended into chaos. Buildings were set ablaze, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the streets. The smell of smoke and blood hung heavy in the air, and the streets were filled with the cries of the wounded and the dying. Amidst the chaos, Lenin and his closest allies, including Leon Trotsky and Grigory Zinoviev, worked tirelessly to establish a new government, one that would be based on the principles of socialism and equality. The Bolsheviks' slogan, "Peace, Bread and Land," had become a rallying cry for the masses, and now, as they took power, they were determined to deliver on their promises. But to understand how we got here, we must delve into the complex web of events and circumstances that led to this moment. The Russian Empire, under the rule of Tsar Nicholas II, had been plagued by poverty, inequality, and war. The country's participation in World War I had drained its resources, and the people were growing increasingly discontent. The Tsar's government, seen as out of touch and autocratic, had lost the support of the people, and the Bolsheviks, with their promise of radical change, had become a powerful force. As the war dragged on, the Russian army suffered a series of devastating defeats, and the economy teetered on the brink of collapse. In the midst of this chaos, Lenin, who had been in exile in Switzerland, saw an opportunity to return to Russia and lead the revolution. He traveled to Petrograd, where he was greeted as a hero by the Bolsheviks, and began to organize the party's efforts to overthrow the government. The February Revolution, which had seen the abdication of the Tsar and the establishment of a provisional government, had created a power vacuum, and the Bolsheviks were determined to fill it. As Lenin wrote in his pamphlet, The April Theses, the provisional government is a government of bourgeois dictatorship, and the only way to save the revolution is to overthrow it. The Bolsheviks' rise to power was not without its challenges, however. The party faced opposition from the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries, who were skeptical of Lenin's radical ideas and feared that he would lead the country into chaos. The provisional government, too, was determined to crush the Bolsheviks and maintain its grip on power. But Lenin and his allies were undeterred, using their charisma and organizational skills to build a powerful movement. As the summer of 1917 wore on, the Bolsheviks gained strength, and their message of revolution and change resonated with an increasingly desperate population. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in Petrograd grew. The city was a powder keg waiting to be ignited, and the Bolsheviks were the spark that would set it ablaze. The provisional government, realizing that it was losing control, attempted to ban the Bolsheviks and suppress their activities, but it was too late. The revolution was underway, and nothing could stop it now. As the historian Richard Pipes wrote, the Bolsheviks were the only party that had a clear and coherent program, and they were the only ones who were willing to take risks and make sacrifices to achieve their goals. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown between the Bolsheviks and the provisional government, and the fate of Russia hung in the balance. The sound of gunfire and screams still echoed through the streets as Lenin stood victorious, and his eyes fixed on the future. The Bolshevik Revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The city was in chaos, but amidst the chaos, a new era was being born. As the Bolsheviks began to consolidate their power, they faced numerous challenges, including the establishment of a new government, the nationalization of industry, and the suppression of opposition. The road ahead would be long and difficult. Yes, but Lenin and his allies were determined to create a new society, one that would be based on the principles of socialism and equality. The Bolshevik Revolution was a pivotal moment in modern history. marking the end of the Romanov dynasty and the beginning of the Soviet era in Russia. As the historian Orlando Figes wrote, the revolution was a complex and multifaceted process involving various social, economic, and political factors. The legacy of the Bolshevik Revolution would be felt for decades to come, shaping not only Russian history, but also the course of world events in the 20th century. In the early years of the 20th century, Russia stood on the precipice of profound change. The vast expanse of the Russian Empire, stretching from the frosty tundras of Siberia to the bustling streets of St. Petersburg, was home to more than 170 million people, yet 80% of them lived in rural poverty. The shimmering palaces of the elite seemed worlds apart from the grimy, overcrowded tenements where the workers toiled endlessly for meager wages. By 1913, the average wage for a factory worker barely surpassed 2 rubles a day, hardly enough to feed a family, let alone provide warmth in the bitter winters. With the thunder of industrialization echoing through the cities, the stark divide between the wealthy aristocrats and the impoverished working class became increasingly untenable. The air was thick with discontent. Bread shortages plagued the streets, and protests were becoming a common sight. In 1914, as World War I erupted across Europe, the situation worsened. Russian soldiers, armed with outdated rifles, faced the brutal cold and relentless enemy fire with little support. By 1916, the death toll for Russia reached an estimated 1.5 million soldiers, and the nation staggered under the weight of defeat. The war drained not only resources but also the spirit of the people. Daily life became a struggle for survival, as food became scarce and rationing took hold. A loaf of bread that cost 250 kopecks in 1914 soared to 1,200 by 1917, leaving families desperate and angry. Amid this turmoil emerged a cadre of revolutionary thinkers, each shaped by their experiences and driven by a vision for a better Russia. At the forefront was Vladimir Lenin, a man whose sharp intellect and unwavering determination set him apart. Born in 1870 in Simbirsk, Lenin was the son of a school inspector, and his early life was marked by the tragic execution of his brother Alexander for plotting to assassinate Tsar Alexander III. This event ignited a fire within Lenin, propelling him into the world of revolutionary politics. He was a man of action, his mind a whirlwind of ideas, and his speeches ignited the hearts of many. As he sat in exile in Switzerland, he studied Marxism, believing that the workers of the world must rise against their oppressors. Leon Trotsky, another pivotal figure, was equally fascinating. Born Lev Davidovich Bronstein in 1879, he was a gifted orator and a brilliant strategist. With a fiery spirit, Trotsky had already spent years in prison and exile for his revolutionary activities. He believed that the revolution in Russia needed to be part of a larger global uprising. His idea of permanent revolution suggested that the success of the Russian Revolution depended on its ability to ignite similar movements across Europe. He was known for his charisma and passion, often captivating crowds with his eloquent speeches. Trotsky's vision was grand, and he was relentless in pursuit of his ideals. Grigory Zinoviev, a close associate of Lenin and Trotsky, played a crucial role in the Bolshevik Party. Born in 1883, Zinoviev was a pragmatic thinker who sometimes clashed with Trotsky's radicalism. He believed in the importance of seizing the moment, and his loyalty to Lenin was unwavering. Zinoviev was known for his organizational skills, guiding the party through the tumultuous landscape of revolution. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Trotsky's intensity, and together they formed a remarkable trio with Lenin. As tensions escalated, events began to unfold that would alter the course of Russian history. The February Revolution of 1917 erupted almost spontaneously. On March 8th, International Women's Day, women gathered in Petrograd to protest bread shortages. Their cries for food and justice resonated with the workers, leading to mass demonstrations. Strikes erupted across the city, and the police struggled to maintain order. The streets were filled with the sounds of angry voices and the clatter of footsteps as thousands took to the streets. The old order was crumbling, and the cries for change could no longer be ignored. Tsar Nicholas II, the autocratic ruler, found himself increasingly isolated. He was a man out of touch with the struggles of his people, clinging to the vestiges of imperial power. By March 15, 1917, the weight of public anger forced Nicholas to abdicate. The monarchy that had ruled for over 3 centuries was gone. A provisional government was formed, led by Alexander Kerensky, who believed in gradual reforms. Yet, the provisional government was weak and struggled to address the pressing issues facing the nation. The people were still hungry, they wanted peace and land, and they demanded an end to the war. As chaos unfolded, the Bolsheviks seized the moment. They promised peace, land, and bread, capturing the imagination of the disillusioned populace. Lenin, returning from exile in April 1917, was met with fervor. He arrived in Petrograd on a sealed train, his arrival sparking enthusiasm and hope among the workers and soldiers. All power to the Soviets, he proclaimed, urging the masses to rise up against the provisional government. With each passing day, the Bolsheviks gained ground, their influence spreading like wildfire through the ranks of disenchanted workers and soldiers. Trotsky's leadership in the Petrograd Soviet further solidified the Bolshevik position. He skillfully navigated the complexities of revolutionary politics, rallying the support of the workers and soldiers. The Bolsheviks, once a minority faction, began to dominate the political landscape. By the summer of 1917, their popularity surged, and the provisional government found itself increasingly unable to maintain control. The October Revolution, which would change the course of history, was now on the horizon. The stage was set for the final confrontation, with the Bolsheviks poised to take control of a nation that had been pushed to the brink by war, hunger, and the promise of a new dawn. The cacophony of revolution echoed through the streets, a symphony of hope and despair intertwined. The lives of ordinary Russians were irrevocably altered as they awaited the unfolding drama. The tension was palpable, a mixture of fear and anticipation as the future hung in the balance. Each person felt the weight of history pressing down upon them, a collective yearning for change that would soon erupt into violence and upheaval. In the shadows of revolution, the desire for a better life was not just a political slogan, it was a fervent hope shared by millions. The struggle for power was not merely about ideology, it was a deeply human story, woven with the threads of ambition, sacrifice, and the quest for justice. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere thickened with the promise of revolution, an inevitable collision of dreams and realities, where the lives of people intertwined with the tides of history. By the end of October, the Bolshevik Revolution would illuminate the path to a new future, carving a legacy that would echo across continents and generations. But for now, the people waited in the twilight of uncertainty, a restlessness growing like the chill of the approaching winter. The revolution was not merely an event. It was a living, breathing entity, fueled by the aspirations of a nation desperate for change, ready to rise against the old order that had failed them so profoundly. The revolution in Russia unfolded not merely as a set of events, but as a profound shift in the very fabric of society. By the autumn of 1917, the air was thick with anticipation, chaos, and the hopes of millions. The discontent that had simmered for years was now boiling over, fueled by the staggering losses of World War I. By mid-1917, approximately 1.5 million Russian soldiers had perished, leaving families shattered and communities struggling to comprehend the enormity of their grief. In the streets of Petrograd, the cries for change grew ever louder, echoing off the cobblestones and the walls of the Winter Palace, a relic of a fading dynasty. Among the clamour, the Bolshevik Party, once a fringe group advocating for radical change, began to capture the imagination of the masses. Vladimir Lenin, returning from exile in Switzerland in April 1917, delivered his April Theses, a manifesto that would galvanize the revolutionaries. All power to the Soviets, he proclaimed, a rallying cry that resonated deeply with the workers and soldiers who felt disenfranchised. The Bolshevik message was clear: the time for half measures was over. The working class must seize power, dismantling the old order that had betrayed them. Leon Trotsky, a key figure in the Bolshevik movement, emerged as an eloquent orator and strategist. His passion for the cause was infectious. "We are on the verge of a great change," he declared during a speech at the Smolny Institute in October. "The storm is coming, and we must be prepared to harness its power. Trotsky's words ignited fervor among the crowds, many of whom were hungry for a vision of a new society, one where the means of production would be held by the people, not a distant elite. Yet, the Bolsheviks' rise was not without challenges. In the wake of the February Revolution, the provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky, struggled to maintain control. The promise of democracy and reform was undermined by continued military failures and a faltering economy. Food shortages plagued cities, with bread lines stretching for blocks as desperation grew. The price of bread in Petrograd skyrocketed, reaching 1.5 rubles per pud, a burden many could no longer bear. Discontent was palpable, and the provisional government's inability to withdraw from the war only exacerbated the situation. In the shadows, Grigory Zinoviev, a close associate of Lenin, worked tirelessly to solidify Bolshevik influence. He understood that the time for action was rapidly approaching. "We must strike while the iron is hot," he urged his comrades during clandestine meetings, knowing full well that the window for revolution was limited. The revolutionaries began to organize, creating a network of support among the workers and soldiers, ensuring that when the moment came, they would not be caught unprepared. The pivotal moment arrived on October 25, 1917, known as the October Revolution, when the Bolsheviks launched their audacious coup against the provisional government. Under the cover of darkness, they stormed the Winter Palace, a symbol of imperial power. The Bolshevik forces, numbering around 25,000, faced resistance, but the will of the people was on their side. "You will be crushed," shouted a loyalist officer as the Bolsheviks advanced. Yet, the tide of history had shifted, and the defenders of the palace found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The seizure of the Winter Palace was not merely a military victory, it was a symbolic act that shattered the remnants of the old regime. As the Bolsheviks hoisted their red banners high, the streets of Petrograd erupted in jubilation. The cries of "all power to the Soviets" reverberated through the city as workers, soldiers, and peasants united in celebration. They believed they were witnessing the birth of a new era, one that promised equality and justice for the downtrodden. But the triumph was bittersweet. The Bolsheviks now faced the monumental task of governing a fractured nation. The immediate aftermath of the revolution was marked by uncertainty. Lenin and his leadership team, including Trotsky and Zinoviev, understood that they had to consolidate their power swiftly. They moved quickly to establish the Council of People's Commissars, proclaiming themselves the legitimate government. Yet, not everyone welcomed the Bolshevik regime. The civil war that followed would pit the Red Army against the White Army, a coalition of monarchists, liberals, and socialists opposed to Bolshevik rule. The stakes were high, and the outcome of this struggle would determine the future of Russia. The Bolsheviks, driven by their ideology and a sense of urgency, began to implement sweeping changes. They nationalized industries, redistributing land among peasants and abolishing private property. The old world was crumbling, and the new one was taking shape, albeit amidst chaos. As the reality of Bolshevik governance began to unfold, the early days of the new regime were characterized by fervent optimism and stark challenges. The population was divided, with many still holding on to the hope of a more democratic government. "We fought for freedom, not for dictatorship," a former soldier lamented as he witnessed the tightening grip of the Bolsheviks on power. The initial euphoria of revolution began to fade as dissent grew more dangerous. Lenin, acutely aware of the fragility of his position, recognized the need for propaganda to maintain support. The Bolsheviks flooded the streets with posters, urging the masses to rally behind their cause. "Peace, land, and bread" became the mantra that encapsulated the aspirations of the people. It resonated with the war-weary soldiers and the starving workers, creating a narrative that justified the radical actions taken by the new government. As winter approached, the harsh realities of life under Bolshevik rule became apparent. The promise of immediate change clashed with the grim conditions on the ground. Food shortages persisted, and many Russians struggled to provide for their families. The government attempted to implement a system of food rationing, but corruption and inefficiency created further discontent. A young mother named Maria, who once believed in the revolution, now found herself waiting in line for hours, only to leave empty-handed. "We were promised a better life," she would say to her friends, "but each day is harder than the last." Yet, amidst the challenges, the Bolsheviks pressed on. They pursued their vision of a new society with relentless determination. The civil war engulfed the nation, and as the Red Army fought against the White Army, the revolutionary government began to take more drastic measures. The Cheka, the secret police, was established to suppress opposition and maintain order. "Revolution is not a tea party," Lenin reminded his comrades, understanding that the fight for survival often required ruthless decisions. The war between the Red and White forces lasted until 1922, claiming millions of lives and leaving the country in ruins. The Bolsheviks, however, emerged victorious, solidifying their control over Russia. Through sheer will and a belief in their cause, they transformed the chaos into a new order. The Soviet Union was born, a superpower that would shape the geopolitical landscape of the 20th century. As the dust began to settle, the legacy of the Bolshevik Revolution became clearer. It was a turning point not only for Russia, but for the world. The ideas that emerged from the revolution would inspire movements and revolutions across the globe. In the years to come, the Soviet model would be both lauded and criticized, serving as a blueprint for those seeking to challenge the existing order. In the quiet aftermath of the revolution, the people of Russia began to adapt to their new reality. The old ways were gone, replaced by a vision of a society that sought to empower the workers and dismantle the structures of oppression. The revolution had promised change, and while the path was fraught with hardship, the hopes and dreams of the people remained alive. As they faced the uncertainties of the future, they clung to the belief that their sacrifice had not been in vain. The Bolshevik Revolution was not merely a moment in time. It was a catalyst for a new world, one that would ripple through history, shaping the destinies of nations and the lives of countless individuals. The rise of the Bolsheviks was a testament to the power of ideas, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring struggle for justice and equality. As October 25, 1917, dawned in Petrograd, a city already trembling with anticipation, the air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the distant echoes of revolution. The streets were alive with the rumble of discontent. Whispers of the Bolshevik plans had reached every corner, stirring the hearts of workers and soldiers alike. The city was a cauldron of emotions. Fear, hope, and desperation blended into an explosive mixture, ready to reshape the course of history. The Bolsheviks, now fully prepared, had set their sights on the Winter Palace, the stronghold of the provisional government led by Alexander Kerensky. The government was weakened, caught in the crossfire of its own indecision and the relentless march of public discontent. Soldiers, weary and disillusioned after years of war, were beginning to rally around the red flags of the Bolsheviks, their numbers swelling as disillusionment with the war remained palpable. By this point, over 1.5 million Russian soldiers had already perished in World War I, leaving families shattered and communities in mourning. At the Smolny Institute, the Bolshevik headquarters, the atmosphere was electric with a sense of purpose. Lenin, having returned from exile just months earlier, stood resolute, preparing for the pivotal moment. "History will not forgive us if we do not seize this opportunity," he declared to his inner circle, a group that included Trotsky and Zinoviev, both of whom shared his fervor. Their resolve was unwavering, propelled by the belief that the revolution was not merely a possibility, it was a necessity. As the clock struck midnight, the first shots rang out, shattering the tense stillness of the night. The Bolsheviks had begun their assault on the Winter Palace, a calculated and decisive move that would mark the beginning of their reign. Armed sailors from the battleship Aurora fired blank shots across the Neva River, a signal igniting the uprising. The sound echoed throughout the city, a clarion call for the disillusioned masses. Trotsky, a formidable orator and strategist, coordinated the attack with precision. He understood the stakes. The success of the Bolsheviks depended on swift action and decisiveness. The provisional government, unable to mount an effective defense, was caught off guard. Kerensky, in his moment of crisis, fled the palace, abandoning his post in a state of panic. The power vacuum he left behind was quickly filled by the fervent energies of the Bolsheviks. By the time the sun rose on October 26th, Petrograd was in a state of upheaval. The Winter Palace had fallen. The Bolsheviks now controlled the central power of Russia, and with it, the fate of millions hung in the balance. The first decree issued by the new regime signaled a radical shift in governance. Land, peace, bread. It was a promise that resonated deeply with a population exhausted by war and deprivation. Yet, the celebration of victory was tempered by the harsh reality that lay ahead. The Bolsheviks faced immediate challenges, not only from the remnants of the provisional government, but also from other factions that opposed their radical vision. A civil war was brewing, threatening to engulf the nation in an even deeper conflict. The human cost of this revolution was far from over. It was only just beginning. In the weeks following the October Revolution, the Soviet government began to implement sweeping changes. They nationalized industries, redistributing land to the peasants, and sought to eliminate class distinctions. However, these measures provoked fierce resistance. The White Army, composed of monarchists, liberals, and other anti-Bolshevik groups, began mobilizing, determined to restore the old order. By the end of 1917, the nation was teetering on the brink of civil war. As the winter months descended upon Russia, conditions deteriorated further. Food shortages escalated into famine, and the urban population faced the specter of starvation. In Petrograd, people began to queue for hours, sometimes days, for meager rations of bread. The daily bread ration shrank from 1,200 grams to just 300 grams per person as the winter deepened. The streets became a tapestry of despair, with the echoes of cries for help mingling with the sounds of political upheaval. Despite the chaos, the Bolshevik leadership remained resolute. Lenin, driven by an unyielding belief in the revolutionary cause, pushed for a series of radical reforms. He proclaimed, "We must turn the tide of history." His words inspired a fervor among the party members, even as they faced opposition from within and outside their ranks. In February 1918, the Bolsheviks made a fateful decision to withdraw from World War I, signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. The treaty, which ceded vast territories including Ukraine and Belarus, was met with outrage by many Russians who viewed it as a betrayal. However, for Lenin, it was a necessary step to consolidate power and focus on internal challenges. "We are not abandoning the revolution, we are saving it," he insisted. Yet, this retreat from the war left scars that would not easily heal. The human toll of the revolution continued to mount as the Civil War erupted in earnest. By 1920, the conflict had claimed the lives of an estimated 7 to 10 million people, either through direct violence, famine, or disease. The brutality of the Civil War left communities shattered. Families were torn apart as men fought for opposing sides, and the landscape of Russia was marked by devastation. Cities that once thrived now lay in ruins, ravaged by the violence that swept across the nation. As the Bolsheviks faced mounting opposition, they resorted to increasingly authoritarian measures. The Cheka, the secret police, was established to root out dissent. Thousands were arrested, imprisoned, or executed on suspicion of counter-revolutionary activities. The atmosphere of fear permeated society, stifling any remnants of opposition. The revolution was morphing into a regime that, while promising progress, was also sowing the seeds of repression. Through it all, Lenin's vision for the new Soviet state remained steadfast. He believed in the potential for a society built on equality and workers' rights, despite the chaos surrounding him. "We are building a new world, and through struggle we shall emerge victorious," he proclaimed during a speech in Moscow. His words, though hopeful, masked the grim reality of a society grappling with the aftermath of revolution and civil war. As the summer of 1920 approached, the Bolsheviks found themselves on the cusp of a crucial turning point. The tide of the Civil War began to shift in their favor, as their armies, bolstered by the Red Army's growing strength, pushed back against the fragmented forces of the White Army. The battles were fierce, and the casualties mounted, but the Bolshevik resolve hardened. They were determined to establish a new order, even at the cost of immense suffering. Amid the turmoil, the specter of famine loomed once more. The agricultural policies implemented by the Bolsheviks, such as war communism, resulted in further food shortages. Peasants, resentful of the state's grip on their produce, resisted the requisitioning of grain. In 1921, the Kronstadt Rebellion erupted, as sailors and workers who had once supported the Bolsheviks turned against them, demanding more freedoms and an end to the harsh policies. "We want bread and freedom," they cried, echoing the very demands that had fueled the revolution. The rebellion was met with a swift and brutal response. The Bolsheviks crushed the uprising with overwhelming force, further entrenching their power through fear and repression. The human cost of the revolution had transformed from an abstract notion into a crushing reality, one that weighed heavily on the shoulders of the populace. The ideals of the revolution, which had once sparked hope and fervor, now stood in stark contrast to the grim realities faced by millions. As the dust settled on the Civil War, the Bolsheviks emerged victorious, having established the Soviet Union. The new regime would go on to shape the course of the 20th century, but the legacy of the revolution was forever entwined with suffering and sacrifice. The promises of equality and justice remained elusive for many, overshadowed by the weight of oppression and the scars left by conflict. In this new era, Lenin's health began to decline, and the very vision he had fought to create was increasingly at risk of being overshadowed by the looming ideological battles within the Communist Party. As he faced the end of his life, he penned a testament urging his comrades to remain vigilant against factionalism and to uphold the revolutionary ideals. The truth of his words echoed through the corridors of power and into the hearts of those who had dedicated their lives to the cause. As the revolution's legacy unfolded, the human cost of the Bolshevik Revolution was etched into the fabric of Russian society. The dreams of a brighter future had been tempered by the harsh realities of governance and warfare. The revolution had transformed the nation, but at what price? The answer lingered in the shadows, a haunting reminder of the sacrifices made in pursuit of an ideal. As the sun set on this tumultuous period, the echoes of history whispered through the streets of a nation forever altered. As the first light of dawn broke over Petrograd on October 26, 1917, the city lay still, a fragile calm enveloping the aftermath of the night's tumult. The sounds of gunfire had faded, replaced by the distant murmurs of a populace awakening to a new reality. The Bolsheviks had seized the Winter Palace, a bold stroke in their quest to dismantle the old order and usher in a new regime. The ornate halls of the palace, once echoing with the laughter of the Romanovs, now bore witness to the hurried footsteps of revolutionaries. It was here that the fate of Russia and the course of history would be irreversibly altered. Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Bolsheviks, stood at the helm of this upheaval. He was not merely an architect of revolution, he was a man driven by a vision. As he surveyed the chaos of the previous night, he understood that the struggle ahead was not just for power, but for the hearts and minds of a weary people. "We shall not only win the victory for the proletariat," he declared, "but we shall also show the world that the people can take their destiny into their own hands." His words were laced with urgency, a clarion call that resonated through the ranks of the Bolsheviks, igniting their resolve. Meanwhile, Leon Trotsky, the Bolsheviks' charismatic war leader, was already orchestrating the next phase of their ambitious plan. Having successfully led the Red Guards in the assault on the Winter Palace, he now turned his attention to consolidating power. Trotsky understood that military success alone was insufficient. They needed to create a narrative that would capture the imagination of the masses. "The October Revolution is the beginning of a new era," he proclaimed, rallying his comrades. The echoes of his voice reverberated across the city, instilling a sense of hope and purpose in the beleaguered citizens of Petrograd. But the path to establishing a stable government was fraught with obstacles. Alexander Kerensky, the interim leader, was not yet ready to relinquish his power. Having fled the Winter Palace, he rallied his supporters, vowing to resist the Bolshevik takeover. "The fight is not over," he insisted, a blend of defiance and desperation in his tone. Kerensky believed he embodied the aspirations of a democratic Russia, yet his vision clashed with the revolutionary fervor ignited by Lenin and Trotsky. Their ideologies diverged sharply, laying the foundation for an inevitable confrontation. As the sun ascended higher in the sky, its rays illuminated the faces of those who had fought and bled for their beliefs. Among them was Grigory Zinoviev, a key Bolshevik leader and close ally of Lenin. He stood amidst the throngs in the streets of Petrograd, witnessing firsthand the fervor of the people. "The revolution has awakened the spirit of the masses," he exclaimed, passion igniting his words. Zinoviev saw the potential in this moment, a stirring of collective consciousness that transcended individual struggles. The ideals of Marx and Engels seemed to materialize in the fervent cries of the workers and soldiers surrounding him. But even as the Bolsheviks celebrated their triumph, the specter of civil war loomed ominously on the horizon. The country was divided, and the specter of conflict threatened to consume the fragile new order. Discontent simmered in various regions as factions rallied against the Bolshevik regime. The cries for justice and equality, once a unifying force, now splintered into myriad voices, each demanding a stake in the new Russia. The first significant challenge came from the Cossacks of the Don region, fiercely loyal to the old regime. They were not merely soldiers, they embodied a way of life that had existed for centuries. "We will not bow to the Bolsheviks," their leader declared, rallying his men. "We will fight for our land, our traditions." The clash between the Cossacks and the Red Army escalated into brutal skirmishes, a harbinger of the larger civil war that would engulf the nation. In the midst of this turmoil, the individuals who had once shared a common goal now found themselves on divergent paths. Lenin, driven by the urgency of his mission, was consumed by the need to secure the revolution. He was often seen at the Smolny Institute, the new seat of power, surrounded by advisors as they crafted policies that would reshape the economy and society. His vision for a socialist state required radical changes, including the nationalization of industry and land redistribution. "The people must own the means of production," he insisted, his voice unwavering amidst the cacophony of dissenting opinions. Trotsky, too, was deeply embroiled in the efforts to fortify the fledgling government. He pushed for the creation of the Red Army, recognizing that without a strong military, the revolution would falter. "We must be prepared to defend our gains," he urged his comrades. The Red Army, forged from the ashes of the old imperial military, would become a formidable force, composed of workers and peasants, united by the ideals of the revolution. Yet, Trotsky's approach to leadership was not without controversy. His uncompromising stance often alienated potential allies. Meanwhile, the common people of Russia grappled with their own realities. In the industrial heart of Petrograd, workers flooded the factories, driven by a mix of hope and apprehension. They had fought for change, yet the promise of a better life remained elusive. "We want bread, peace, and land," they chanted, echoing the slogans of the revolution. The initial euphoria of October began to wane, replaced by questions about the future. The shortages that had plagued the cities persisted, exacerbated by the ongoing civil strife. The specter of famine loomed, casting a shadow over the Bolshevik dreams of prosperity. As winter descended upon Russia, the realities of governance began to take their toll. The Bolsheviks faced opposition not only from armed factions, but also from within their ranks. Struggles for power erupted among the leadership, revealing fractures in the once unified party. Zinoviev and Trotsky clashed over the direction of the revolution, their debates steeped in ideological fervor. "The revolution is in danger," Trotsky argued, advocating for a more aggressive stance against their opponents. Meanwhile, Zinoviev urged caution, emphasizing the need to build alliances with other socialist factions. Amidst this turmoil, Lenin remained resolute, believing that the revolution would prevail as long as they stayed true to their principles. He understood that the struggle was not merely about seizing power, but about transforming society. "Our task is to educate the masses," he asserted, knowing that the revolution's success hinged on the people's understanding of its goals. In his heart, he believed that the ideas of socialism could flourish even in the face of overwhelming odds. The winter of 1917 to 1918 tested the resolve of the Bolsheviks. The civil war intensified, with various factions vying for control. The White Army, composed of monarchists, liberals, and disillusioned former soldiers, posed a significant threat. Fighting erupted across the vast expanse of Russia, from the icy plains of Siberia to the streets of Petrograd. As the conflict raged, the Bolsheviks were forced to make difficult decisions, sacrifices that would shape the future of their nascent state. Yet, within the chaos, moments of clarity emerged. In the small gatherings of workers, discussions about democracy and equality flourished. The ideals of the revolution, once abstract, became tangible as people began to articulate their aspirations. "We are the voice of the new Russia," one worker declared passionately at a factory meeting. The sense of agency and empowerment spread like wildfire, igniting the belief that they could shape their own destinies. As the snow fell softly on the streets of Petrograd, the aspirations of the revolution were both fragile and fervent. Lenin, Trotsky, and Zinoviev continued to navigate the treacherous waters of governance, their paths intertwined, yet marked by their distinct visions for the future. The world they had envisioned was on the brink of realization. Yet the challenges were relentless. The winds of war would soon escalate, as the very fabric of Russian society faced the ultimate test. In the depths of winter, as the struggle for survival intertwined with the struggle for power, the revolution became a crucible. The ideals of socialism would be challenged, tested, and ultimately forged in the fires of conflict. The individuals who had once stood together would soon find themselves at odds, each grappling with the weight of their choices. The turning point had arrived, and with it, the realization that the revolution was only the beginning. The morning after the Bolshevik victory, Petrograd was a city transformed. The echoes of gunfire had faded, replaced by the sounds of a populace awakening to a new reality. The Winter Palace, once a symbol of imperial grandeur, stood in stark contrast to the chaos that surrounded it. The Bolsheviks had seized power, but the cost of that power weighed heavily on the shoulders of its leaders. In the weeks that followed, the city was not merely rebuilding, it was reimagining itself amidst the rubble of the old order. The streets were filled with the murmurs of uncertainty and hope. Grigory Zinoviev, a key figure in the Bolshevik movement, stood before a crowd in the heart of Petrograd, his passionate voice carrying over the throng. "We have done what the people demanded," he declared, his fervor igniting the spirits of those who had long suffered under the weight of oppression. "This is not just a victory for the Bolsheviks, it is a victory for the working class." The crowd roared in agreement, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the early morning sun. Yet, as exhilaration filled the air, the reality of the aftermath loomed large. The civil war that would engulf the nation was already on the horizon. The Bolsheviks were aware of the precariousness of their situation. Just weeks after their triumphant seizure of power on October 25, 1917, they found themselves in a precarious position, facing not only the opposition of the old regime, but also the discontent of those who felt betrayed by the rapid changes. The struggle for power was far from over. It had merely entered a new phase. Food shortages were rampant, exacerbated by the ongoing World War I and the economic turmoil that had preceded the revolution. By December 1917, the price of bread had soared, with a loaf costing over 1.5 rubles, a staggering increase from just a few kopecks before the upheaval. People stood in long lines, their faces etched with desperation. The specter of hunger haunted the streets of Petrograd, and the Bolshevik government struggled to find solutions. Amidst these challenges, Vladimir Lenin remained resolute. He understood that to maintain power, the Bolsheviks had to act decisively. In January 1918, he addressed the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, stating, "We shall not allow the old bourgeoisie to return. The bourgeoisie wants to take power and will stop at nothing to regain it." His words resonated deeply, yet they also marked the beginning of a shift toward increasingly authoritarian measures. The promise of freedom for the proletariat began to take on a more complex shape, one that would require the suppression of dissent. Trotsky, too, was at the forefront of the efforts to stabilize the new government. As the head of the Red Army, he sought to consolidate power and defend the revolution from both external and internal threats. The civil war loomed ominously, with various factions forming against the Bolsheviks. The White Army, comprising monarchists, liberals, and socialists opposed to Bolshevik rule, began to organize. By mid-1918, the fighting would erupt into a brutal and bloody conflict that would see millions of lives lost. In the midst of this turmoil, families mourned their losses. The death toll from the revolution and the subsequent civil war would eventually reach an estimated 10 million. Eyewitness accounts described the scenes of despair. A woman named Maria Ivanovna, her voice trembling with grief, recalled, "I buried my husband in the backyard, beside the cherry tree. There are no proper graves anymore. We are too afraid to gather together." The intimate tragedies of war unfolded not only on the battlefield, but also within the homes of ordinary Russians, as they grappled with loss, fear, and uncertainty. The Bolsheviks' attempts to reshape society also led to sweeping changes in governance. By December 1917, they had dismantled the existing state apparatus, replacing it with a system of councils known as Soviets. This new structure aimed to empower workers and soldiers, yet its implementation was fraught with difficulties. The complexities of governance were laid bare as factions within the Bolshevik Party began to emerge, each vying for influence in the new order. As the winter months deepened, the struggle for survival intensified. The government implemented war communism, a series of policies aimed at managing the economy during the Civil War. Industry was nationalized, and grain requisitioning was enforced to feed the Red Army and urban centers. These measures, while necessary for survival, ignited resentment among peasants and workers alike. Eyewitness accounts from the time reveal a growing discontent. "We are not free men anymore. We are slaves to a new master," lamented a shopkeeper in Petrograd, her words echoing the sentiments of many. By early 1918, the impact of these policies was palpable. The once bustling markets of Petrograd had become shadowy remnants of their former selves. Goods were scarce, and the barter system began to replace currency as people sought to survive. The sound of horse-drawn carts filled the streets as merchants attempted to trade whatever they could find. In this climate of desperation, the revolutionary ideals of the Bolsheviks began to fray. Promises of abundance and equality faced the harsh realities of a nation in turmoil. Amidst this backdrop, the international community took notice. The Bolshevik Revolution had sent shockwaves across the globe, inspiring socialist movements in various countries. In Germany, strikes erupted as workers sought to emulate the revolution's success. However, the response from Western powers was far from supportive. Fears of a communist uprising spread, and by mid-1918, British and French forces had begun to intervene, supporting the White Army in a bid to quell the Bolshevik tide. The spectre of foreign intervention loomed large, adding another layer of complexity to the Bolshevik struggle for survival. As spring approached, the Civil War erupted into open conflict. By May 1918, the White Army had launched a series of offensives, pushing into Bolshevik-held territories. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and the sounds of battle became a part of daily life in Petrograd. Families were torn apart as brothers found themselves on opposing sides of a conflict that threatened to engulf the nation. The emotional toll of the war was felt deeply, with mothers mourning lost sons and children growing up in a world defined by chaos. Lenin's leadership became more pronounced as the Bolsheviks faced mounting challenges. In June 1918, he stated, "We must fight to the last drop of blood." His words resonated with fervent determination, but also revealed the relentless nature of the struggle ahead. The revolution, born out of hope for a brighter future, now faced the grim realities of war and the sacrifices it demanded. In the months that followed, the Red Army emerged as a formidable force, bolstered by Trotsky's strategic prowess. Under his leadership, the army grew from a ragtag group of volunteers into a disciplined fighting force. By the end of 1918, they had begun to turn the tide against the White Army. The battles were fierce, each one a testament to the desperation and resilience of a nation in upheaval. But the human cost was staggering. In towns and villages across Russia, families grappled with the aftermath of violence. The cries of children echoed through desolate streets, their innocence lost amid the chaos. An elderly man in a small village lamented, "We have seen too much death. Our hearts are heavy with sorrow, and our futures are uncertain." The pain of the Civil War extended beyond the battlefield, leaving scars that would take generations to heal. As 1919 dawned, the Bolshevik government began to consolidate its power further. The Cheka, a secret police force, was established to root out counter-revolutionaries and dissent. The atmosphere of fear permeated society, and trust evaporated. Neighbors turned against one another as the specter of betrayal became a constant reality. "We no longer know who to trust," whispered a teacher, her eyes filled with worry. "The revolution has turned us into strangers in our own homes." Throughout this tumultuous period, the Bolshevik leadership grappled with the promises they had made to the people. The ideals of socialism, equality, and justice hung in the balance as the revolution descended into violence and repression. Lenin, reflecting on the state of affairs, remarked in a letter to a comrade, "We are in a time of trial. We must not falter." Yet, the fabric of the society they sought to build was fraying under the weight of war and internal strife. In the years that followed, the legacy of the Bolshevik Revolution would be defined not only by its triumphs, but also by its failures. The human cost of the Civil War would haunt the collective consciousness of the nation, shaping the course of Russian history for decades to come. The echoes of revolution would reverberate through the fabric of society, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of those who lived through it. By 1921, with the Civil War still raging, the Bolsheviks faced an economic crisis. Famine swept through the countryside, claiming millions of lives. The specter of starvation loomed large, and the once hopeful promises of the revolution seemed distant. Eyewitness accounts tell of desperate families, scavenging for food, their eyes hollow with despair. "We are fighting for our survival," one mother recounted, her voice trembling. "But what kind of future can we expect?" The revolution had ignited a flame of hope that now flickered precariously in the face of overwhelming adversity. It was a time of reckoning, where the ideals of the Bolshevik Revolution clashed with the harsh realities of life in a war-torn nation. The world watched as the Soviet Union emerged from the ashes of revolution, forever changed by the struggle for power and the quest for a better future. As the years passed, the human toll of the Bolshevik Revolution would be measured not just in numbers, but in the stories of those who lived through it. The families torn apart, the dreams shattered, and the hope that endured even in the darkest of times would become part of the narrative of a nation forever altered. In the quiet corners of history, the voices of the past would whisper the tales of resilience and survival, reminding future generations of the sacrifices made in the name of revolution. The Bolshevik Revolution, a seismic shift in the fabric of society, left an indelible mark that reverberated across decades and continents. As the last echoes of gunfire faded from the streets of Petrograd, the world bore witness not just to the birth of a new government, but to the emergence of a new ideology that would challenge the very foundations of capitalism and democracy. By the dawn of the 20th century, the revolution had metamorphosed into a powerful narrative, one where the struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie became the cornerstone of a global movement. In the years following the revolution, the Soviet Union transformed into a superpower, wielding its influence across Eastern Europe and beyond. The ideas of Marxism, once confined to the pages of dusty tomes, surged forth from the confines of ideology into the realm of statecraft. The early 1920s saw the establishment of the Comintern, an organization aimed at promoting worldwide communism. As Lenin famously declared in 1920, "We must put an end to all wars, and we must do this by the revolution." This was not merely rhetoric. It became a rallying cry for Marxists around the globe, fueling revolts and uprisings in countries as far-flung as Germany and Hungary. Yet, the revolution's legacy is not without its shadows. The civil war that followed the Bolshevik rise to power was marked by brutality and repression. Estimates suggest that upwards of 10 million lives were lost due to starvation, conflict, and the ensuing chaos, a testament to the high human cost of revolutionary fervor. The Bolsheviks, led by figures such as Leon Trotsky, ruthlessly suppressed dissent. Trotsky himself stated, "You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you." This encapsulated the harsh reality of a regime that believed in the necessity of violence to achieve its ends. The consolidation of power under Lenin and later Joseph Stalin led to the establishment of a totalitarian state. By 1936, the Great Purge had begun, with millions imprisoned or executed as the regime turned on its own. The ideology that had promised liberation and equality became a mechanism of oppression. As historian Orlando Figes noted in A People's Tragedy, the revolution turned into a tragedy, not just for the Russian people, but for the entire world. In the name of the revolution, the Bolsheviks silenced artists, writers, and intellectuals who dared to voice dissent, creating a culture of fear that stifled creativity and innovation. Yet, the mythologizing of the revolution began almost immediately. The October Revolution was framed as a heroic uprising, where the people's will triumphed over the oppressive Tsarist regime. Propaganda art, literature, and film portrayed the revolution as a noble quest for justice. Soviet leaders, particularly during Stalin's reign, cultivated this narrative, transforming Lenin into a near-mythical figure whose wisdom was unquestionable. Streets, squares, and towns were renamed in his honor, creating a cult of personality that would persist long after his death in 1924. In the West, perceptions of the revolution varied widely. Initially, many viewed it with skepticism or outright hostility. The Bolsheviks' withdrawal from World War I through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918, which ceded vast territories to Germany, sowed further distrust. Winston Churchill referred to the Bolshevik government as a foul baboonery, reflecting the prevailing attitude of the time. However, as the years rolled on, the revolution inspired a wave of leftist movements across Europe and North America. The Great Depression of the 1930s saw a resurgence of socialist and communist parties, who drew lessons from the Bolsheviks' success in seizing power during a time of crisis. The impact of the Bolshevik Revolution extended beyond political borders. It influenced labor movements, civil rights struggles, and anti-colonial movements throughout the 20th century. The idea that the working class could rise up against their oppressors ignited passions in places like China, where Mao Zedong adapted Marxist principles to fit the agrarian context of his country, leading to the Chinese Communist Party's eventual rise to power in 1949. In Latin America, revolutionary leaders such as Fidel Castro invoked the Bolshevik example to justify their own revolutions, reimagining the struggle for independence through a Marxist lens. As the Cold War dawned, the legacy of the Bolshevik Revolution took on an even more complex dimension. The ideological battle between capitalism and communism became a defining characteristic of global politics. The Soviet Union, emerging as a superpower, engaged in a fierce competition with the United States, not just militarily, but ideologically. The fear of communism permeated Western societies, leading to events like the Red Scare in the United States, where allegations of communist infiltration led to widespread paranoia and persecution. Joseph McCarthy's witch hunts resulted in the blacklisting and ruin of countless lives, illustrating how the legacy of the Bolshevik Revolution had morphed into a specter haunting both sides of the ideological divide. As the decades passed, the Soviet Union faced its own set of contradictions. The promise of a classless society often clashed with the reality of bureaucratic elitism. The state's grip on power became synonymous with stagnation and repression, leading to disillusionment among its citizens. The phrase, "We pretend to work, and they pretend to pay us," became a popular saying, reflecting the growing apathy and dissatisfaction with the regime. By the 1980s, economic malaise and social unrest sparked movements for reform, culminating in the eventual dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. The revolution's legacy continues to evoke debate and analysis. Historians grapple with its significance, questioning whether the ideals of socialism and communism were irreparably tainted by the violence and oppression that accompanied their implementation. The revolution is often viewed through a prism of utopian aspirations turned dystopian realities. Shayla Fitzpatrick in The Russian Revolution posits that while the revolution aimed to liberate the proletariat, it ultimately led to new forms of oppression, leaving behind a mixed legacy that continues to be dissected, mythologized, and reinterpreted. Today, the Bolshevik Revolution serves as a reminder of the complexities of political change. It challenges us to consider the costs of radical transformation and the ways in which ideals can be distorted by power. The struggle for equality and justice remains alive, echoing the dreams of those who fought and sacrificed during those tumultuous years. In a world grappling with inequality, the lessons of the Bolshevik Revolution resonate anew, reminding us that revolutions can yield both progress and peril. As we reflect on this legacy, we cannot ignore the human stories intertwined with these historical events. The sacrifices of ordinary Russians who endured famine, war, and repression shape our understanding of what was lost and gained. The revolution was not merely a political upheaval, it was a profound disruption of lives, families, and communities. The voices of those who lived through it, whether they were revolutionaries or victims, offer invaluable insights into the human condition amidst historical upheaval. In the end, the Bolshevik Revolution is a tale of paradox. It was a quest for liberation that led to oppression, a beacon of hope that cast long shadows. The ideals of equality and justice championed by its leaders often gave way to authoritarianism and fear. Yet, it remains a pivotal moment in history, a catalyst for change that reshaped the world in ways both profound and painful. As we close this chapter, we acknowledge the complexity of its legacy, embracing the lessons it imparts while honoring the lives forever altered by its tumultuous passage. And in that remembrance, we find not just history, but humanity itself, imperfect, striving, and endlessly resilient. As the echoes of the Bolshevik Revolution fade into the distance, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of a profound reflection on the complexities of human nature. The story of ambition, love, power, and survival unfolds like the pages of a history book, revealing a tapestry woven with threads of hope and despair. It illustrates how, in times of great turmoil, the human spirit can rise to meet the challenge or be crushed under the weight of its own desires. In the heart of the revolution, we witnessed how the hunger for power can consume individuals and nations alike. Vladimir Lenin, driven by the ideals of Marxism, transformed from an exile in Switzerland to the architect of a new regime. His determination was unwavering. He stated, "There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen." This urgency, this relentless drive for change, became a dual-edged sword. While it ignited the hearts of millions yearning for a better life, it also paved the way for authoritarian rule and bloodshed. The tenderness of human connection emerged amidst the chaos. The revolution was not solely a political upheaval, it was also a deeply personal struggle. Family ties, friendships, and love could be both a source of strength and a vulnerability. As Grigory Zinoviev rallied the masses, he imbued his words with conviction, urging them to believe in the power of their collective action. His declaration that the revolution is not a one-time event, but a continuous struggle, resonates with the notion that love and unity can drive people to achieve the unimaginable, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet, the story also serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of idealism. The lofty goals of the Bolsheviks quickly became mired in the realities of governance and opposition. The civil war that ensued revealed the darker side of revolution, the willingness to sacrifice lives for power, the betrayal of comrades, and the erosion of the very freedoms they sought to establish. The Bolsheviks, who once stood as champions of the proletariat, transformed into enforcers of a regime that silenced dissent. The words of historian Orlando Figes linger in our thoughts. The revolution devoured its children. It is a poignant reflection on how ambition, when unchecked, can lead to betrayal of one's original ideals. As we ponder the legacy of the Bolshevik Revolution, we cannot ignore the impact on the broader world. The rise of the Soviet Union as a global superpower reshaped international relations, instigating a century-long struggle between ideologies. The revolution inspired movements across continents, yet it also instigated fear and hostility, reminding us that the quest for power can lead to both liberation and oppression. The duality of human nature, our capacity for both love and destruction, reveals itself starkly in this narrative. In the quiet of our own reflections, we are left to contemplate the lessons of this tumultuous period. What does it mean to strive for a better future? How do we balance ambition with compassion? The revolution teaches us that while the quest for power can ignite hope, it is the bonds we forge with one another that sustain us through adversity. It is love, in its various forms, that creates the resilience needed to endure the trials of life. As you settle into the stillness of the night, carry with you the stories of those who dared to dream of a different world. Let the whispers of ambition, the echoes of struggle, and the warmth of human connection guide you into slumber. For in the end, it is our shared humanity that binds us, our ambitions, our loves, our failures, and our survival. In this tapestry of life, we find comfort in the knowledge that we, too, are a part of this ongoing narrative, ever unfolding, ever seeking,